Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Jens, moderator of this GPN Visions panel discussion called Build a Winning Team, in which my special guests will provide their recommendations for positive approaches to staffing challenges. We have two guests today, Dr. Samantha Hornberger, owner of Bright Family Eye Care in Indiana, who's an industry advisor, and Dr. Steve Vargo, an author on optometric business issues and optometric practice management consultant for IDOC. Welcome, doctors.
Thanks, Scott. Hey, couple times we've done this. I really appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me. I kind of feel like I'm in rarefied air with Steve here.
Oh, likewise.
You both are creating oxygen for us. I love it. Let's start with you, Dr. Hornberger. Tell us about a real staffing issue or challenge or two that you've had in your practice, because today's business owner is faced with this. What has it been? What's a real example from you?
I think our biggest challenge with staffing hasn't been so much around hiring, but training. I kind of have a philosophy of hire for personality and culture fit. And so that leaves a lot of training on our part. It's rare for me to hire somebody who comes equipped to necessarily do the job that I'm hiring them for. So for us, it's figuring out training processes, repeatable training processes. And then it's also making sure that we're flexible with hiring. I believe in getting the right seat or the right butt in the right seat on the bus. And so sometimes that means you've hired somebody who turns out to be a better fit for a different role in the office. So I think our biggest challenges are, once we find that right fit for our practice, making sure that they're trained appropriately so that they can, excel at the job. And then also making sure that we're always open to, hey, if there's somebody who would maybe be a better fit for another role, not having that outlook that, nope, this is what I hired you for. This is what you're going to do. And that can be a little challenging sometimes.
So as a brief follow-up, there can't be an eye doctor that owns an eye care business that doesn't have trouble finding a person with experience. Do you then train through a system you've created? Do you use third-party training services? Do you use training that might come from reps and industry companies? How do you do it?
We kind of do a combination of all those things. So typically, when I hire someone new in the office, the first thing they're going to do is spend at least 2 weeks with our front desk staff. We want to make sure that everybody's equipped to, answer a phone, see when somebody's appointment is. And so a lot of the training we do is just, shadowing current staff that does a similar job. So we do a lot of kind of mentorship between staff in the office. We do use some online training. We use Spexy. I'm sure you're familiar with Kayla's program, but we use that for some of our optical training. And then a lot of it is just hands-on. Our culture is kind of, we want everybody to do things their own way, but similarly. And so I think the most effective thing is just watching somebody else do the job, and then being available to mentor and answer questions.
Steve, do Doctor Alliance groups have training systems available for members, or is it elsewhere in the industry they need to find the support?
They do. And some of it is giving people verbal feedback on the training aspect. Spexy is great. I'll second that as maybe one of the best platforms out there. And we're not even affiliated with Kayla's program, but it's a really great program to refer back to. I do think on the topic, and I'm sure Samantha agrees with this, that I get asked a lot about outside programs, about third party. Is there a website I can go to? Is there a course I can take? They'll say, can you come to my office and train my staff? There are some really good resources out there, but I think it's vitally important that it also is hands-on in the office, because everybody's office is unique. And there's great resources out there that supplement that. But I really think it's very important that you have that you have an internal program Because I rarely, if ever, get asked that. How do we create a better internal training process? So when Samantha talks about that, she's got that, she understands it, but so often, yeah, I can direct you to some good training resources, but you really need to be hands-on with that as well.
That's good advice. And as long as we're throwing out resources, I know Lynn Lawrence has got an impressive resume in terms of helping practices team build. So you can look him up as well. So let's go back to your point of view. I mean, Dr. Vargo, you're a consultant. You hear it from all angles. Where is the wind blowing on staffing issues? I know it really got bad through the pandemic. Are we improving? Is it staying at a sort of bad level? Where are we at?
I wish I could say it was getting better. I think we're learning to adapt to adversity better. So what do we do when we're faced with adversity? We I think in many ways learn to adapt better. I will say this, Scott, I think it's caused a lot of doctors and maybe managers as well to ask better questions, to start asking better questions, maybe questions that should have been asked before, around how do I hire better? They want to know, how do I ask better interview questions to get the right person in here? There's interest in personality tests. How do I retain people? And a question that comes up a lot, I think it's such a great question to ask, is how do I keep my staff happy? Because I don't want to lose the good ones. And it's a great question to ask. And really, it's a fun discussion to have because it takes us down that road of leadership and the things that you need to do to make sure that you're doing the right things. There's still a challenge around pay, as we all know. That's certainly not unique to optometry. So decisions have to be made now. When do I let somebody go who wants pay beyond what I'm willing to give them? Do I invest more into an individual? But hard decisions have to be made around payroll now that have put additional challenges on most practices.
And that's particularly true when practices are in metro areas where health systems are paying pair optometric staff more than they can afford to pay or giving benefit packages. Back to leadership, one more thing, Steve. ODs have consumed leadership insight from a lot of places. Is there a recommendation you give doctors on how to, appropriately consume everything out there that suggests they can help them become a better leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're just talking about all the different references that are out there and resources. Yeah. I have my approach. And so, and I think it's aligned with a lot of the, research into how to become a better leader. Because, Scott, I didn't understand it that well either, to be honest with you, when I started consulting. And I didn't realize how prevalent it was in practices and what I call a leadership void. When there's a leadership void, somebody's going to step up and be the leader. And it tends to be the most vocal person in the organization, which can be a good thing, but usually it's not. So often, so many of the problems, whether it be, staff management issues, or we're not growing as fast, or we've got, we're not reaching our goals, it comes back to a lack of leadership. So, I tend to focus on some simple things, setting clear expectations for people, like Samantha said, having good training systems in place. You can't just neglect that process. You can't just abandon your staff, right? Putting people in positions of strength. And Samantha mentioned being flexible. We can't get so rigid with the job description that we can't take a person who would be great as an optician and force them to sit behind a computer. So being flexible with that, involving the team, but also having some systems in place that hold people accountable. So I've looked at a lot of, not just within our industries, but outside of our industries as well, looked at a lot of the research, a lot of the data at companies that are very effective at leading teams and leading people, and just ask the question, what are they doing differently? So a lot of my leadership feedback is that distilled into things that we could apply to an optometric practice.
And Samantha, you become a clear leader in your practice, and you're a humble leader. You don't lead with the loudest voice always. You have clear and concise plans. I want to ask you this. I often tell people about leadership that leadership involves going and doing what other people might do for you. Taking out the trash, being the first one to arrive, sometimes being the last one to leave. Do you do any of those small things, or is there an example of something else you do that shows your staff that you're willing to help them?
Absolutely. I mean, my staff hopefully would back me up on this, that I truly believe in knowing how to do everything and then delegating most of it so that I don't have to. Right. So there's There's probably not many processes in my office that if I had to jump in and do that I couldn't do. I can order, I can run all the equipment, I can run a lab job, I can answer a phone, I can schedule. And I think that really shows my team that I'm part of the team. I'm not just, the practice owner sitting at the top, but listen, I'm in the trenches with you. And I think that's something that's really appreciated. I know, some of my staff have come from other offices, both eye care and otherwise. And they're like, oh, wow, our doctor never would have answered the phone. So yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not above taking out the trash and cleaning a bathroom. Hopefully I have staffed well enough that I don't have to do those things and I can spend, my time and effort doing things that, increase the bottom line and customer service. But I firmly believe that you should know how to do everything in your practice.
Yeah.
If it was left to just you could keep the wheels on the bus. I wanted to echo back a little bit to what, Steve was saying about, the processes of training and things like that. And I think that a big part of hiring comes back to your hiring process too. So I always advise people, and this is what I do in my office. If I, call for applications, sometimes I'll do that on social media. I'll ask my employees if they have anyone, that would be a great fit for us. And even when I go routes like Indeed and places like that, I'm going to go through a process of kind of whittling down and narrowing down who's going to be a good fit for us and who isn't. And I think it's important that you have a process like that in place. For me, that is, I'm going to take applications. I'm going to have at least a phone conversation, if not a Zoom meeting with applicants, just 10 minutes just to kind of gauge personality. Then I'm going to invite them into the office for at least a 2-hour, what I call a working interview. And if they've never worked in the position before, that really just means you're going to shadow somebody in my office that does what I'm hiring you to do, or at least what I think I'm hiring you to do. They're going to shadow for, an hour and a half or so. They're going to spend at least 20 to 30 minutes just hanging out with my staff, even the people that don't do the job that we're hiring for. And then they're going to spend about 15 minutes with me, just kind of as a wrap up of, what did you think and that kind of stuff. What I have found is that my staff are a great judge of character. And people will show their true colors when they're hanging out with the staff versus, that picture perfect, want to say everything right that I get when I'm interviewing somebody. So I would definitely encourage people to, have that. And I even pay people. I'll say I'll pay you $15 an hour. You come in, you hang out with my staff for 2 hours. And basically, if you're not willing to do the process that I go through, well, then you're not a good fit for us. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But if I can't get you on a video call, get you in the office for a couple of hours, then it's just not a good fit.
I mean, that's a tremendous plan. What do you say to the person who's thinking as they're listening to that, I can't find one person for a job, one warm body. I doubt I'm going to get somebody as an applicant to come in for that amount of time. I have to guess that you're thinking that if they don't commit to that amount of time, they're not a candidate. Is that it?
That's absolutely true. And the other thing that I will say is because we tend to train from within, you're going to be much more likely to get people who are willing to learn and willing to do some things to maybe level up their knowledge, level up their career. And they're going to be much more willing to do those kinds of things, to come in, for those 2 hours. And so often, when I post a job, I make it very clear that no experience is necessary, that we will train on the job. And because of that, I tend to get, at least 10 or more, fairly qualified applicants. And to me, the qualifications are, are you willing to go through my process? Are you friendly? Do my staff get a good vibe from you when you hang out with them? Because my qualifications aren't based on knowledge that you already have. I can teach you what you need to know. I need you to be willing to learn.
That's great. So Steve, what's the bigger issue for staffing? Is it finding new staff and applicants that will go through this process? Or is it back to what you said earlier, the leadership void and maybe keeping current ones? If you're losing employees, I got to guess the implication is maybe there's a leadership void. Is it a bigger issue to find them or to keep them?
I haven't seen data on that. I would assume it's a more difficult time finding staff or finding qualified staff. And what we've seen is that a lot of offices have actually reduced their staff, which didn't used to be the case. Something I'm seeing now where offices are having to make a strategic decision sometimes. Our approach has always been in the past, hey, if you're growing, I'm just a growth-minded person. So my advice would be, let's add to the staff. Let's figure out ways how to leverage this. But I empathize with the doctors that are saying it's just been so much of a struggle to find good people. We're going to take a look at strategically, maybe dropping a vision plan or two, maybe focusing on different plans, private pay, adding a specialty. If we can get by on fewer staff, they are making that decision. And so I think it's probably not the most politically appropriate term to use these days, but a lot of offices they're kind of gun shy toward hiring new people, and really, I think putting more effort into retaining the good ones. Like I said before, one good thing that came out of this is somewhat of that adapting to adversity and asking the right questions around how do I become a better leader. So I think a lot of offices have sort of become scared into hiring more people. But in all fairness, it would benefit them greatly to have a program kind of like what Samantha's talking about that is going to increase the chances of somebody being a successful hire. And she's found a bit of a cheat code in this process because she's hiring people that don't necessarily need a lot of experience. What I think is one of the biggest mistakes is that assumption that because somebody has experience, that they're going to be a good fit. I see it all the time with people who are office managers. Hey, this person worked 7 years in a place as an office manager. They could have sucked at being an office manager for 7 years, but you're bringing them in. So I only know this because I use it in a presentation, but the number one, the top reason that new hires don't work out is actually because they're not coachable, which if you think about it, they're coming in. Now you have to do your role. It is possible that management fails the employee sometimes, but if you're doing your role, you're giving the new hire the time, the training, the resources, the support they need to succeed, but they're just not willing to implement. There's a bad characteristic there that's almost impossible to overcome. They're just not coachable. So Samantha's figured out a way to bring on people that has to be a focus for her, is making sure that people, especially if they don't have the skills that they need, the skill sets, that they are going to be coachable when they come on, which is a great quality to attract in new hires.
One quick follow-up for you, Steve. In terms of keeping staff, we talked about pay issues for new staff. Do you get questions about how to give appropriate pay raises or what appropriate pay is for these people who do stick around? Because, there's a point where some practices will say to me, I can't afford to keep that person anymore. They're getting attractive offers from outside. I can't pay them. Any insights to offer there?
Yeah, we do. And I mean, we can look at regional numbers to give a sense of what that position would pay. I'll want to know how strong of an employee are they? Because there's a sense sometimes that we can. I know it's hard to replace people, but it sometimes bringing in somebody new. I mean, being willing to pay way above market value for somebody you don't even like is something we really need to think twice about. But but also helping doctors get more comfortable with a higher payroll, because, again, to attract good people, there is a lot of competitors out there that are paying more, like you said. And so being willing to adjust your payroll accordingly, but also I think it comes back to how do I keep people happy? Because people in general don't like change. And if you're paid fair, but you're happy, you're doing the kind of work you want to do, your boss appreciates you, you feel like you're part of the team, you're making a difference. When that $1 or $2 an hour raise comes along, an offer from somewhere else, you might be less likely to take it. So again, it goes back to making sure that the people you have are happy, because that's the one. It's going to be an easy decision if you're not happy where you're at and something comes along a mile up the road that's a better offer than what you're being paid currently.
And Samantha, you actually did what Steve mentioned earlier. You've reduced the size of your staff. you make people feel like the culture is worth staying there. Give us a little bit of an explanation of how you got to thinking about reducing the size of your staff, improving culture thereby, and delivering the same through your patients and through your practice performance.
Yeah. So I mean, really for us, it was less about, taking a bloated staff and making it smaller. And it's more about thinking about how do we make the staff that we have function kind of on a lean model, right? And part of that is making sure that we're training appropriately, right? That we're delegating, but also it's figuring out in what areas we can outsource, what areas can we use a remote service. For instance, we all of our billing and payment entry from insurance, that's all outsourced. In the past, we've outsourced insurance verifications. And I think in the future, it's looking for other ways that we can use virtual employees, virtual assistants. That's definitely something that we're looking into. If there's a job that can be done that doesn't necessarily have to be done, that's in the building 40 hours a week, that can help a lot. Number one, lighten up the load for the staff that you do have physically in your office, but then two, lighten up your payroll load some, because if you only have the need for somebody for 10 hours of work, ordering contact lenses, or, somebody can work from home doing scheduling or something like that, then it frees up the people that you do have physically in the office to do, more value-based tasks. So that's a big thing that we're kind of looking towards. But I've always been a believer in outsourcing the things that you can, and so that the people in the office can really concentrate on patient care, customer service, those sorts of things. And I think that talking about increased payroll and things like that over time. So if I was going to chime in there, I would just say, if somebody on my team that I have, trained from, no knowledge, or at least, added to what they can do, and they get an offer to make more money, or, have an advance in position or something like that, the first thing that I would tell them is, good for you. Like, I hate to lose you, but it makes me happy that you're expanding your knowledge and that you want to learn more, do more. It just happens to be more than I can pay you to do. So I believe wholeheartedly in paying people what they're worth. I'll be the first person to say that if you're really valuable to my practice, I'm going to pay you as such. But you also can't be scared. And I know, like Steve said, in the current climate of trying to hire, people are afraid to let somebody go. And sometimes that letting go is just like, what, that's a great offer and I can't meet it. So I wish you well. And if you need, I'm here in the future if you need anything, but that's more than I can pay you. And I also think that keeping people happy goes a long way. Because like you said, a $1 or $2 raise, at a job that's an unknown versus knowing what you have here, I think that goes a long way.
That's good insight. Steve, how do you recommend doctors do measurements of their staff, analyze their performance? Do you have any sort of basic insights you can offer today? I know there's deeper ways to do it, again, through guidance, through various resources in the market, but how would you suggest we look at staff performance?
Yeah. And again, I think that takes us down the road of leadership. And if we're going to measure staff's performance, I think it starts with figuring out, what are we measuring? And I get less concerned about the specifics of what you're measuring, and I'll get to that in a second. But I mean, just some examples might be with an associate, which I actually work with quite a bit. And a lot of the frustration from a doctor owner will be saying, my associate isn't producing at the level that I want them to, or at the level I'm at. Usually my first question will be, do they know what they're supposed to be producing at? And very rarely has there been any conversation around that. So, for an associate, it could be some simple things like, average revenue per patient or capture rate. And I think a fair I think you want to be careful not micromanaging or overstepping your boundaries clinically with your associates. But I think it's a fair expectation from a production standpoint that the associate would be somewhat similar in production as the owner, and be given that feedback as well. So I'm a big advocate for sitting down with the associates and going over those numbers, not in the point of, hey, are you're not meeting your numbers, reprimanding them, but rather almost taking like a mentorship role. Like, let me help you. Let me share with you the conversations that I have with the patients, the questions I ask, how I present things, how I educate patients in a way that don't feel salesy, and it translates into numbers that are hopefully similar with the owner. If I'm just going to make up round numbers here, but if my average revenue per patient is 400 and my associate is 380, probably not making too big of a deal about that. But sometimes we see disparities like 400 versus 250. So we got to figure out why there's such a disparity and hopefully help kind of coach or mentor that OD. I mean, for an optician, it might be multiple pair sales, or it could be, average frame sales. I think as long as you have something that you're aiming toward, it's a good thing. So it's going to vary. And I'm a really big advocate for involving the staff in these things and sitting down and saying, what are the goals? Maybe I think from a CEO standpoint, it's always incumbent upon you to have a vision, right? But then sitting down and communicating that vision and saying, team, how can we get there? What are the things we should be doing? What are the things we need to get better at? And through that discussion comes, I think you start getting clear on what the goals are and what do we need to measure, but then also having a mechanism of accountability built into that. Because if you just say, hey, here's the goal, and there's no follow-up with that, I promise you nothing will change. But when you say, let's sit down, whether it's monthly, whether it's quarterly, have some process where we're going to sit down and the team has to report, whether it's a department, whether it's an individual. If you've been really clear on what the goals are and what we're measuring, one of the best definitions I've ever heard of accountability is getting people to perform in a way in which they know in advance they're going to have to account for their performance at a later time. So, Scott, if I just give you something to do and say, go do it, but there's no follow-up, you may or may not do it. But if I say, let's sit down a month from now, or let's sit down in Q3 and you report to me where we're at, how we're doing, and I'm going to help you. If we're not hitting that, let's find out why. Is it because it hasn't been a focus of yours and it should be? Is it because of a valid reason you got too much on your plate? That's how you drive change. That's how you drive outcomes. What you're measuring is just the outcome, just telling you if what you're doing is working or not. I wouldn't put all my focus on that. I'd put it more on, are we doing the things? Are we executing in ways that are driving the outcomes that we're looking for?
And I want to emphasize that you said that you should involve that person, whether it's an associate doctor or an optician or somebody else, in the determination of what metric might be the one that is sure to help them know that they can grow on it, right? That you're going to involve them in picking it. Is that right?
It goes against conventional thinking from a leader standpoint. It's okay to involve other people. It's okay to ask them for their input. Again, from the standpoint of making people happy. Here's how to not make an employee happy. Scott, here's what you're going to do. Go do it. Right. And if you don't like what I'm doing, one of the top reasons employees don't do what you want them to do, again, based on research, they don't like your ideas. Now, they're not going to tell you that probably, but that's where you get a lot of friction and resistance. And that's where a lot of doctors will say, well, my staff did it for a few days or a week, and then they went back to doing it the old way. Yeah, because they don't like your way of doing it, or maybe just the perception that they felt like it was being forced on them. So if you want to keep people happy, say, hey, here's the goal. Here's what we're trying to build. And here's the why. We want to create a great culture. We want to be able to have a healthy, a healthy revenue so we can reinvest back into the practice, so I can reward you, the team, with bonuses, and we can hire more people. This is the vision. Let's get clear on the things we need to do. And through those discussions, a lot of times people would just volunteer things that you would have come up with anyway, but it feels like it's their idea. Then you're just supporting their ideas. I think that's so much more effective than trying to set edicts or dictate everyone's job to them.
And Samantha, you did this. I mean, you started choosing data and picking data points to analyze your practice, and then that also helped you analyze your staff. Tell us how you did it.
So for me, that data helps me figure out what I need to do better to help them succeed. So something that I like to look at on at least a monthly basis is that revenue per patient. I know when my revenue per patient goes down, that I'm not giving my team the things that they need to be successful. Okay. So when I stop talking about appropriate products in the exam room, when I stop looking for diagnosing and recommending treatment for things like dry eye, when I stop talking to, headache sufferers about different lenses and things that can help them, that's when my production per exam goes down. And if that goes down, it means that I'm also not talking to those patients about the things that I recommend, which means it makes it harder for my staff then in the optical or, whoever to, make the recommendation on the back end. It always works better when it's coming from us. So I use it as a gauge of how well am I doing, giving them the things that they need to be successful. I also use it. We've got a goal and bonus program in our office. So I look at a monthly and a quarterly, and each quarter I sit down and I set revenue goals for our office based on what the same time frame the year before looked like, based on what the previous quarter looked like, and then I share those goals with everybody. And when we meet those goals, they get a monthly bonus. When we meet the quarter, they get a quarterly bonus. If we exceed the goals, I share the revenue over the goal that we set with them. So, they have some share in the overall success. And I'll tell you that I've been doing this for about a little over a year now. I think I started really with first quarter of 2022 was when I really got serious about having a program like this. They met all 3 goals, which just meant that I needed to raise the goals. I want them to be attainable, but I don't want them to be easy, right? Mm-hmm. The first time that we told everybody what their quarterly revenue sharing bonus was going to be, literally like people had tears in their eyes. I mean, it's not because it was such a huge amount. I mean, it was a nice bonus, but I think it was the thought that they work hard for me and I'm sharing the benefits of that hard work back with them. So that's been a huge one for us. And then I think, when I set goals, I always look at, in each department, how can I help them be successful at reaching this goal? What are the things, 2 or 3 things that each person can concentrate on that's going to help us to reach that goal? And so when I, send a message to my team, okay, here's our goals for the quarter. Here's the things you can be doing to make sure that we're meeting these goals so you get your bonuses. And I think giving them those actionable steps really goes a long way in making sure that they know that I understand their job. I understand what they do on a daily basis and how they can contribute to their practice. But then, just making sure that I'm not just throwing out this goal and like, let's see if we can do it, but it's, here's stepwise, like, here's how I see that working in my brain. And then asking for feedback. I am not shy about, hey, listen, if there's something that you think that we could be doing better in patient care, better in customer service, I want to know about it. And so thankfully we have a really open line of communication between me and the staff where they're comfortable sharing those things because I ask them to.
You speak with a lot of,
add to that.
Go ahead.
Is it the last couple of minutes of that were so important? Scott, maybe you could pull the last 3 minutes or so and just on its own. When Samantha said focusing on what they do, I wrote down 2 words. She said execute at one point and focus on what they do. And part of that is her input, but also asking for the input of others. I get a lot of calls and inquiries about bonuses, and almost always 99% of the time it focuses on the outcome, on the actual what are we measuring? Like if we grow by 10% this year, everybody gets a bonus and a pizza party. I'm less concerned. I don't know of that one thing that drives everybody. So people want to know, well, what should we be focusing on? Multiple pair sales, and you have to find what you think is going to work for you. But my question will always be, okay, sounds great. What are they going to do to drive that? Because there is this feeling, I think, that we're just going to dangle a carrot out there and everybody's going to grab it. So if I just offer, if we grow by 10%, if our multiple pair sales goes up by this amount, great, fine. But what is the staff going to do differently? Right? What are they going to change? How are they going to produce differently? So that really needs to be part of that discussion if we're focusing on on staff productivity is making sure that people understand, and that's, again, partly their ideas, but partly your feedback and coaching as well. What do they need to do differently that's going to drive outcomes? Then measuring it to find out, is it working or not? And if it's not working, do we make adjustments? Are they not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and having those discussions? But so much of this is execution. So I just wanted to highlight that part.
Samantha?
Well, I would say too that, you're asking people to do certain things. You got to make sure that you're giving them the tools that they need to do it too, right? So as you're looking at, what are the things we can be doing? And if it's not happening, or if we're, continually missing the mark on our goals, then it's, well, what can I do? What can I do as the leader to make this easier, to make these goals more attainable? Is it coaching, with a staff member? Is it, do I need to do something differently? Right? Am I not, prescribing from the chair the way that I need to be? Am I not presenting something well enough that we're getting, good acceptance of, specialty care and things like that? But I think it's really important that if you're not hitting those benchmarks and goals, then you have to bring it back to why, what's holding us back? Because if it's a goal I've set, I must think it's attainable. Right. So what's the key points that are keeping us from getting there? And then making sure that you spend time coaching not only your staff, but coaching yourself on, how do I make those things actually happen?
For all of us that have dealt with bonus programs, Samantha, there have been times where we know our staff's not going to make it, either by we're watching the numbers, we haven't developed the right vision, we haven't given the right tools, but we say, hey, last year in the second quarter, we got this, last quarter of the year, we got this, I think we can achieve it. How do you deal with that when that bonus isn't coming?
So in our office, we kind of deal with that in two ways. Number one is we set both monthly, and then that translates into a quarterly goal, right? So the way that we have our program set up here is, let's say in the month of January, you make your goal, they get their bonus, and then in February you miss. Right. So they don't get a bonus for February, but then let's say like you just kill it in March, right? So they get their March bonus, but they also ended up beating the quarterly bonus. Well, then they make back February, right? So not only do they get paid for March in March, but because they met the whole quarter, they also get back paid for any that they missed during the quarter. And then they get, a percentage of anything that's over for the quarter as a whole. So I think that there's some motivation that's built in there, right? And just having the conversation. April was not, it wasn't the worst month ever, but it wasn't a great month for us. And I'm hearing that kind of universally from practices, that April just was really a down month for a lot of people for some reason. So we didn't make April, but my team knows that, they have the opportunity in May, and what are we, June, in May and June, that we can make up for that. Right. And that if we have really good months, then, so it's kind of built in motivation for the following months, knowing that all is not lost. You can still end up getting your entire, bonus for the quarter.
Good. Steve, I'd like to ask you about some actionable steps. Maybe it's, the first step or a second or third to this idea of building a winning team. When you talk to a doctor, we've talked about a lot of the elements today. If you were going to sort of put together the steps, what might they look like to somebody who's listening today?
Yeah, I think initially, and we're probably getting a little bit repetitive at this point, but I think it's okay for people to hear this over and over, is one, again, just that I think many times a leader's first failure is the failure to be clear. I think clarity is so important. And there's a repetitiveness to that in terms of, I heard this phrase once, I can't remember where I saw it, but it went, when you're tired of hearing yourself say it, that's when people are starting to hear it. So, and I think from a leader standpoint, that really feeds into building culture as well, that the more you repeat something, people start to hear it over and over, and they remember it, they retain it, but they also start to recognize it as something that's important to you. But I just think getting really clear on expectations. I've seen so many practices that expect things out of their employees but they're not getting that. And employees are arguing over who's supposed to be doing what, and mistakes keep happening. I mean, I had an owner once tell me, after complaining about his staff, and I asked about training, he said, well, we pretty much just throw them to the wolves out there. And so the results you're getting are pretty much the results I would expect. So there's getting clear on those expectations, but the training is so important, having the training and ongoing. And I know it's just semantics, but I like to separate the word training and development. So training tends to, I think we assume it's that there's a deadline there, or there's a time frame, which is fine. It's, our training for new hires is 4 weeks or 2 months, whatever it is. But I think it's important that you have some kind of ongoing employee development as part of that. There's always something new people can learn. Doctors go to CE. We keep learning. So why can't the same apply to your staff? And from them taking a greater interest in their job, I think it constantly teaching them, training them. There's a lot of tools out there that they can continue to learn from, and hopefully keep them engaged with their work. So I think, just to kind of lead off with, to put a process in place that's going to be conducive to a successful team. It's, again, that clarity and that ongoing training and development is so critical.
Yeah, the word that I extracted out of what you said is ongoing, and it can be as simple as developing standards around which we deliver, say, special testing in the clinic,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that they will evolve over time, right? That there might be one way you do it. You get training from the company rep when you bring in a big piece of equipment, and then it adjusts based upon how you want to improve patient workflow or throughput.
Yeah, these can be short conversations too. I don't necessarily want to imply that ongoing development, big companies, they spend all kinds of money on employee development programs, right? So I'll give you a real quick story. Once, is when I was practicing, we had our pre-testing, a lot of our pre-testing stuff was right outside the exam room. And when the technician would do the NCT, people would a lot of times ask, what does this do? It blows the air into the eye. And I would hear the technician say, I'm not sure, just ask the doctor. But in fairness, we never told her what it really did. So I couldn't expect her to answer that. So I consider this employee development. I pulled her aside later and I said, hey, I'd like you to have something to say when people ask that. I think it would look better, reflect better on us. So I just spent a couple minutes talking about what the test did, what it checked for, what the numbers mean. And it was so interesting to watch her answer that question differently when she got asked it, almost with this level of pride that she knew what it was. And I think it made such a better impression on the patient. It was sort of an aha moment for me that I'm going to take the time, those little teaching moments or coaching moments throughout the day. Maybe it's just a retinal, something you saw on the retina, you've got a picture of it. Show your staff what it is. Keep investing, keep pouring into them. But yeah, I think it's really important that until that person leaves you, and sometimes you have to wish them well. You almost should be coaching people up to the point where some of them are going to leave you for more money because you've done such a good job with that they've moved on to the next level. That reflects well on you. But until that point came, I made it a point to constantly be developing the people on the team.
And Samantha, do you have an example or two of staff strategies where you've sort of helped them stay alive, feeling energized the way that Steve just described it, enthused for their work?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, I kind of have this saying that burnout equals boredom. Okay. And I think that as much as we hear of our colleagues and doctors feeling that burnout, I think it's true for our staff as well. I mean, let's be honest. We're kind of insulated in our exam rooms and we're insulated in our office. And we probably only have to deal with a small fraction of what they have to deal with as far as patient care goes, and dealing with patients in the public. So if we're feeling burnout, then guess what? Our staff is too. Personally, having dealt with burnout, 3 or 4 years ago, what eventually dawned on me is that I wasn't burnt out so much that I was just bored, right? And so when we talk about staff training and staff development and giving them the opportunity to learn more and know more, I think that goes a long way to battling the everyday burnout that our staff can feel too. And obviously leads to a happier staff as well, because they have that pride in the knowledge that they have and their ability to help patients with that knowledge. The other thing that I would kind of throw in is, I think that a lot of people, when it comes to their staff, they have an idea of what their staff should look like. How many people should they have? How many opticians should they have? How many technicians should they have? And I think people get into trouble, pardon me, but shoulding all over their businesses. Successful offices, happy offices, they don't all look the same. So I think that a lot of us would do well to spend less time thinking about what things should look like and think more about what works for us, what works for our staff. When I talk about small sizing your practice, I don't mean that it has to be a small practice in terms of revenue. I just mean that you need to think about what works for you and what do you need to keep you and your staff happy and enthused and ready to come to work every day. And the honest fact is that's going to look different for every practice, and it's going to look different for every staff. But I think the pillars of it are, you don't have to be your staff's best friend, but they have to know that you care. They have to know that you appreciate what they're doing. Please and thank you goes a long way to making a happy staff. And then giving them opportunities to learn and develop and grow, even if you know that means that they're going to learn and develop and grow away from you eventually. And you're going to do the same thing for the next lucky soul that gets to come into your office and have the benefit of the culture that you build.
We've heard so much from both of you today about different ways to build winning teams. That can include staff that end up moving on. So I want to get to the wrap-up point. Samantha, let's go with you first. Can you sort of encapsulate what you want to say to the audience now that we've had a chance to talk about so many different points? I'd love to hear your final thoughts or advice.
Yeah, I think, nobody is going to dispute the fact that staffing and training and hiring is probably the most difficult job that a practice owner has, because it just has such an effect on not only your bottom line, but how you're able to care for patients. And the bottom line is that's what we're all looking for, right? We do this for a reason, and generally it's that we want to take great care of people, and staffing is such a big part of that. So I think my takeaways are, don't be afraid to train on the job. Make sure that you have a good training program set up. And that doesn't have to mean that there's, workbooks that you work through and things like that. It really can mean, as much as just that new hire can just shadow the person that's doing their job, being available for feedback, asking your staff for feedback, and then, not being afraid to make sure that you have the right person doing the right job, and rehiring when necessary. Try not to be afraid of hiring and training. It gives you the opportunity to meet some awesome new person that, is going to be a great part of your team. So those are my takeaways.
That's great. Steve, what are your last thoughts?
Yeah, I think there was a time years ago where being a good leader, and a lot of things we've talked about are leadership attributes that anyone could apply. And I think maybe years ago, being a good leader was somewhat of a luxury, and it's become a necessity. It's become a necessity. Your ability to lead a small team of people has become critically important. So I'm going to have my closing thought be, maybe we'll call it tough love. I hear all the time doctors who own their own business say, I'm just not good at managing people. I'm not a good leader. I'm not good at managing people. And so I'm going to call out people's BS a little bit on that. You can't make that an excuse anymore. There's a million books out there on leadership and managing people. There's a million podcasts. There's audiobooks. Learn. Nobody's perfect at it. It's trial and error. It's trying new things and seeing what works and what doesn't. But your ability to effectively lead others, be a good leader, be a good, listen, do some of the things that we're talking about, in terms of training, in terms of setting expectations, in terms of involving your team, having accountability, putting better training systems in place. Just keep evolving that. You're never going to arrive, but keep getting better at it. So just keep learning. Like I said, there's millions of resources out there to help you develop those skills. And if you're going to own any business that has more people working at it than just you have to figure out how to work with other people in ways that you can apply these leaderships that's going to drive the organization in a positive direction.
Yeah, and for all of you who are listening who have made it this far, it's a demonstration to me that you actually care about what Steve just said, that you're thinking of ways to take in new bits of information. If you want another resource on leadership, think about a book like from General Stan McChrystal, Team of Teams, and the follow-up to it, One Mission by Chris Fussell. This book talks about a shared consciousness that leadership gives to its people, and thereby providing the leadership to say to the folks on the front lines, you go and do what I would do, be me. And when you develop empowered execution, what you're really doing is saying, what Samantha said earlier, I can take out the trash. I will once in a while clean the bathroom if I need to, but I know you can do it. You can do it as well as I can. And then give me some feedback on how it goes. So Team of Teams is a great example of what you just mentioned, Steve. I'd like to thank both Dr. Hornberger and Dr. Vargo for their incredible expertise and commitment to this GPN Visions audience and the community. To learn more, I invite you to visit visions.gatewaygpn.com. Dr. Vargo, thanks for your attendance.
Thanks so much, Scott. I always appreciate it.
And Dr. Hornberger, thanks for sharing your real-world examples. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And to the audience, thank you for attending.